Massive alien vessel appeared in Earth's atmosphere without warning on a quiet Tuesday morning. People across Australia looked up to see the enormous ship, its hull once gleaming but now scared and dull, moving slowly across the sky. The ship wobbled as it descended, clearly damaged and barely under control. It crashed in the remote Australian outback with a thunderous impact that shook the ground for hundreds of kilometers. Military forces from Australia, joined quickly by American, Chinese, and European allies, rushed to the crash site. When they arrived, they found something unexpected. The entry hatch was wide open. The crew had fled, leaving behind their broken vessel. There were no signs of the aliens, just their abandoned ship half buried in red soil. Colonel Choi Min-ho led the first team inside. He had expected resistance, or at least some sign of the crew, but found only silence and darkness. The ship's emergency lighting cast eerie blue shadows through corridors tall enough for beings much larger than humans. The air inside was breathable, but carried strange scents, like cinnamon mixed with metal. "It's empty," Colonel Choi reported back. "They've abandoned it completely." For 3 days, military teams secured the site while scientists waited impatiently outside. When they were finally allowed in, Dr. Kim Ji-ho was among the first. A brilliant aerospace engineer with 3 PhDs by age 30, she had been flown in from Seoul within hours of the crash. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped into the alien vessel. "This is beyond anything we've ever seen." She whispered to her assistant, Lee Jono, "Look at this metal. It's not even on our periodic table." The ship was massive inside, with rooms that seemed designed for beings twice human height. Most systems were offline, but some still hummed with power. In what appeared to be the command center, the team found translation devices, small silver discs that, when activated, projected holographic text that shifted until it became readable in the observer's language. Dr. Kim activated one such device and watched in amazement as a final log entry appeared in the air before her. "Vessel deemed irreparable. Resource allocation inefficient. Abandonment protocol enacted." "They just left it here?" Lee Juno asked, bewildered. "Because it was broken." Dr. Kim nodded slowly, walking around the command chair designed for a much larger being. "The Taveri," she said, pointing to a symbol repeated throughout the ship. "That must be what they call themselves." Over the next week, more scientists arrived. They discovered that the Taveri were a spacefaring species with technology centuries beyond humanity's reach. Their ship could manipulate gravity, harvest energy from empty space, and travel faster than light. But something had damaged it, perhaps a cosmic event or a battle, and rather than repair it, they had simply discarded it on the nearest suitable planet. Earth had become their junkyard. "It's like someone abandoning a Ferrari because it got a flat tire," Dr. Kang Haijin, an astrophysicist, commented as they examined the engine room. A month after the crash, Dr. Kim presented her findings to the United Nations Security Council. The room was tense, filled with world leaders afraid of what the ship might mean. Was it a Trojan horse, the beginning of an invasion, or truly just an abandoned vessel? Dr. Kim stood confidently at the podium, her presentation displayed on screens behind her. "The Taveri are at least 400 years ahead of us technologically," she explained. "Their ship suffered damage to several key systems, particularly their faster-than-light drive and their main power core. Based on the log entries we've translated, they determined that the ship wasn't worth saving. Their culture seems to value efficiency above all else. So they just dumped their trash on our planet," asked the French representative, anger in his voice. "In a manner of speaking, yes," Dr. Kim replied. "But what they consider trash might be our greatest opportunity." The room grew quiet as Dr. Kim clicked to the next slide, showing her team's analysis of the ship's systems. Many of the ship's components are still functional. The Taveri abandoned it because, by their standards, too many critical systems were damaged to make repairs worthwhile. But that's because they have very specific ways of doing things. They abandoned it because they couldn't fix it their way, she told the Security Council, her voice growing passionate. But humans have always excelled at making do with what we have. Dr. Kim walked away from the podium, moving closer to the council members. Throughout history, humanity has adapted, improvised, and overcome. Where the Taveri see only a binary solution, perfect function or abandonment, we see possibilities. We can learn from this ship, adapt its technology, and perhaps even repair it using our methods. You want to try to fix an alien starship? The American representative looked skeptical. With technology centuries beyond our understanding. Not immediately, Dr. Kim admitted. But I'm proposing a long-term international project. We start by learning everything we can. Then we begin adapting what we learn to our technology. And yes, eventually, we might be able to repair this ship. The room burst into discussion, voices overlapping. Some nations wanted to destroy the ship, fearing its technology. Others wanted exclusive access to study it. The debate raged for hours until the Secretary General called for order. Dr. Kim, she said, what happens if these Taveri return for their ship? Dr. Kim had expected this question. The log entries suggest they consider it worthless. But more importantly, they indicate the Taveri have abundant resources. This ship is nothing to them. Like a wealthy person abandoning a car with a cracked windshield because it's simpler to buy a new one. Later that evening, after the council had approved her proposal for an international research initiative, Dr. Kim stood alone in the Australian night, looking up at the stars. The crashed ship loomed behind her, its dark mass blocking out part of the sky. Park Min-ha, her research partner, joined her. Think we can really do it? He asked quietly. Fix something this advanced? Dr. Kim smiled, still looking at the stars. The Taveri are technologically superior, but they're limited by their thinking. They abandoned this ship because they couldn't imagine fixing it differently than how they built it. They lack creativity. She turned to face the enormous ship, its alien form silhouetted against the night sky. Humans are different. We're messy and inefficient sometimes, but we're creative. We find solutions where others see only problems. The Taveri left this ship because they thought it was worthless. She paused, her eyes shining with determination. But one civilization's trash becomes another civilization's treasure, and we're going to make it fly again. As Dr. Kim walked back toward the research camp, her mind raced with possibilities. The ship contained technologies humanity had only dreamed of. Artificial gravity, energy sources beyond anything on Earth, materials stronger and lighter than any metal. Even broken, it was the greatest gift humanity had ever received, and she was determined to make the most of it. Tomorrow, she said to Park, we start taking it apart piece by piece. We learn everything we can, and then we show the universe what humans can do with a second-hand starship. For 3 years, the world's greatest minds converged on what became known as Project Phoenix. The name was fitting. A legendary bird rising from the ashes, just as they hoped to make the abandoned alien craft fly again. The Australian outback had transformed from empty desert into a bustling research complex. Over 5,000 scientists, engineers, and support staff from 47 countries now called the site home. Dr. Kim Ji-ho stood at the main entrance to the enormous ship, watching teams of researchers coming and going. 3 years of work had accomplished more than anyone had expected, but less than she had hoped. Progress report? Asked General Han Sung-go, the military overseer assigned by the United Nations. Better than yesterday, worse than tomorrow, Dr. Kim replied with a tired smile. She hadn't slept properly in days. Come inside, I'll show you. They walked through corridors that now hummed with human activity. The alien ship's problems were surprisingly relatable. Energy inefficiencies, damaged propulsion systems, and fragile computational networks. It was like a car with a broken engine, flat tires, and faulty electronics, just on a vastly more complex scale. The good news is we understand about 40% of their technology now, Dr. Kim explained as they entered the engine room. The bad news is that the remaining 60% might as well be magic. The engine room was massive, with a central column that reached 20 meters high. Around it, teams worked on various components, some clearly alien, others made on Earth. Their quantum core is the main problem, Dr. Kim said, pointing to the column. It's damaged beyond repair, at least using any method we can understand from their manuals. General Han frowned. So we've hit a dead end. I didn't say that, Dr. Kim smiled. She led him to a side chamber where a team was working on something that looked distinctly human-made. This is what the Taveri hadn't considered, human ingenuity. When we couldn't repair their quantum core using their methods, we decided to create a hybrid system. The device was clearly a fusion reactor, but modified in ways General Han had never seen before. We're using Earth's nascent fusion technology as a power source, but incorporating alien materials and principles, explained Dr. Song Jawa, the nuclear physicist leading this part of the project. It won't be as efficient as their original system, but it should provide enough power. Should. General Han raised an eyebrow. Science is always about should until it becomes does. Dr. Song replied with a grin. Over the next 6 months, the hybrid power system took shape. What the Taveri would have considered a crude solution became the heart of Project Phoenix. Human technology meshed with alien materials in ways neither civilization would have imagined alone. The navigation system presented similar challenges. The alien computers used principles beyond human understanding, operating on quantum states rather than binary code. When parts of it proved impossible to repair, Dr. Kim's team created their own navigation system that interfaced with the remaining alien technology. It's like putting a smartphone GPS in a spaceship, explained Dr. Yoon Min-jae, head of the computer science division. Not elegant, but functional. By the start of the 3rd year, the biggest question remained: could it fly? Enter Commander Park Do-yeon, former fighter pilot with the Korean Air Force. He had been selected from thousands of candidates worldwide to be the test pilot for the hybrid vessel. His record was impeccable, but more importantly, he had an intuitive understanding of flight that couldn't be taught. The simulator says it should work, Commander Park said during a briefing, studying the projected flight path on a screen. But simulators don't account for how systems behave in the real world. Are you saying you don't want to try? Asked General Han. Commander Park laughed. Not at all. I'm saying it's going to be more interesting than the simulator suggests. The first hover test was scheduled for dawn. As the sun rose over the Australian desert, the massive alien ship, now a hybrid of Taveri and human technology, prepared for its first movement in 3 years. Commander Park sat in the adapted control chair. The original had been designed for the much larger Taveri, but human engineers had modified it with additional controls that Park could reach. All systems check. His voice came through the speakers at the command center, where Dr. Kim and her team monitored every aspect of the ship. Power at 62%, reported Dr. Song. That's the best we can do with the hybrid core. It's enough, Commander Park replied confidently. Beginning hover sequence in 3, 2, 1. The ground trembled. Dust rose around the massive ship. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, slowly, imperceptibly at first, the ship began to rise. 1 meter, 2 meters, 5 meters. The massive vessel, weighing thousands of tons, now floated above the desert floor. Cheers erupted in the command center. Dr. Kim allowed herself a brief smile before focusing again on the readings. Power fluctuating but stable, she reported. How does it feel, Commander? Heavy, Park replied. Like trying to balance an elephant on a beach ball, but responsive. I'm going to try a small lateral movement. The ship moved sideways, slowly at first, then with more confidence. Park guided it in a gentle circle, never rising more than 10 meters off the ground. After 15 minutes, he brought it back down exactly where it had started. When he emerged from the ship, the waiting crowd of researchers broke into applause. It works, he said simply to Dr. Kim when he reached the command center. "How does it compare to the Taveri design?" she asked, knowing he had studied their flight manuals extensively. Commander Park considered this for a moment. "It's less precise. Their systems, when working properly, would allow for perfect control. Ours is messier. But there's something else." He paused. "Their system doesn't allow for intuition. It's all programmed responses. Our hybrid system lets me feel the ship, adjust on the fly." Later that evening, at the celebration party, Commander Park raised a toast that would become famous throughout the project. "The Taveri built a perfect machine that broke. We're building an imperfect machine that works." Dr. Kim reflected on those words as she stood alone outside, looking at the ship silhouetted against the stars. The Taveri had abandoned it because it wasn't perfect anymore. Humans had embraced it precisely because of its imperfections, seeing them as opportunities rather than flaws. Over the following months, test flights became more ambitious. The ship, now officially named Phoenix, began short atmospheric flights, then longer ones. Each test revealed new challenges, and each challenge sparked new solutions that combined human creativity with alien technology. "We're not just fixing their ship," Dr. Kim told her team after a particularly successful test flight. "We're creating something new, something neither humans nor Taveri would have built alone." The Phoenix wasn't as elegant as the original Taveri design. It wasn't as efficient, but it flew, and with each flight, it flew better, as human ingenuity found ways to work with, around, and through the alien technology. "Do you think they'd be impressed or horrified if they saw what we've done to their ship?" Dr. Song asked one day as they watched the Phoenix perform a complex maneuver over the desert. Dr. Kim smiled. "Probably both. But that's what makes humans special. We don't just adapt to technology. We make technology adapt to us." 6 years after its abandonment, the rechristened Phoenix was ready for its greatest test yet. Leaving Earth's atmosphere, the world watched with bated breath as the massive hybrid vessel, once deemed worthless by its alien creators, prepared for its first journey into space. Commander Park Do-yeon sat in the captain's chair, now properly fitted for a human pilot. Around him, the bridge buzzed with activity as his carefully selected crew of 15 ran final checks. Dr. Kim Ji-ho stood beside him, her face a mixture of anxiety and pride. "All systems green," reported Chief Engineer Moon Sunny. "Hybrid core at 89% efficiency, better than we expected. Life support optimal," added Medical Officer Ba Jono. "Environmental systems fully functional." Commander Park nodded, his expression serious but his eyes bright with excitement. "This is Phoenix Control. We are go for launch in T-3 minutes." In the 6 years since the ship had crashed on Earth, it had been transformed. While maintaining much of the alien technology, humans had rebuilt it in their own image. The interior had been redesigned for human use. The propulsion system combined Taveri principles with human innovation. Even the computer systems have been adapted to respond to human commands while still utilizing the advanced alien algorithms. 1 minute to launch, Park announced, his voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. "First stop, Earth orbit. Second stop, the Moon. And if all goes well, Mars by the end of the week." The countdown reached 0. With a deep humming that resonated through the entire ship, the Phoenix rose. Unlike its shaky hover tests years before, it now moved with confidence, accelerating upward through the clouds. Passing 20,000 meters, Navigation Officer Lee Ju-won reported. "All systems stable." The sky darkened from blue to indigo to black. Stars appeared, no longer twinkling but sharp points of light against the void. "We've cleared the atmosphere," Lee announced. "We're in space." The bridge erupted in cheers, quickly settling back to professional focus. They had practiced this moment hundreds of times in simulations, but nothing compared to the reality. "Setting course for standard Earth orbit," Commander Park ordered. "Let's take her for a proper spin before we try anything ambitious." The Phoenix gracefully entered orbit. For 24 hours, The crew ran tests, checking every system twice. When everything performed flawlessly, Commander Park received permission to proceed to the next phase, a journey to the moon. The Taveri drive system, even in its hybrid state, made the journey trivial. What had taken Apollo astronauts 3 days in 1969 took the Phoenix just 2 hours. The ship orbited the moon, its sensors mapping the surface with detail never before achieved. After returning to Earth orbit for additional checks, the final decision was made. The Phoenix would attempt what no human vessel had done before, a manned mission to Mars in days rather than months. This will be the true test, Dr. Kim told the crew. The distance to Mars will push our systems to their limits, but I believe in what we've built. The journey began smoothly. The Phoenix accelerated away from Earth at speeds no human spacecraft had ever achieved. The hybrid drive performed even better than expected, bending space in ways that human science was only beginning to understand. Mars grew from a red dot to a proper planet before their eyes. As they approached, they sent signals back to Earth, images of unprecedented clarity, data that would keep scientists busy for years. Commencing orbit of Mars, Commander Park announced 4 days after leaving Earth, all systems nominal. Preparing for surface scan. For 3 days, they orbited the red planet, collecting more data than all previous Mars missions combined. They didn't land. That wasn't part of this first mission, but they laid the groundwork for future expeditions. Preparing for return journey, Park announced on the 4th day. Setting course for Earth. The Phoenix turned away from Mars, its sensors recalibrating for the journey home. That's when Navigation Officer Lee noticed something unusual. "Commander, I'm detecting multiple objects approaching the solar system," she reported, her voice tense. "They're moving faster than anything we've ever tracked." Dr. Kim moved quickly to Lee's station, studying the readings. Her face paled. "Those are Taveri ships. Their configuration matches what we learned from the Phoenix database." "How many?" Park asked, keeping his voice calm for the crew's benefit. 7, Lee replied, all larger than the Phoenix. Based on the database, they appear to be a battle fleet. Commander Park considered their options. They could try to hide, but the Taveri sensors would almost certainly detect them. They could run for Earth, but that might lead the fleet straight to their homeworld. "Open a communication channel," he decided. "Let's introduce ourselves properly." For several tense minutes, there was no response. Then, suddenly, the main screen flickered to life. The image that appeared made several crew members gasp. The Taveri were tall, willowy beings with gray-blue skin and 4 arms. Their faces featured multiple eye stalks that moved independently, and what appeared to be speaking membranes rather than mouths. This particular individual wore what the Phoenix's database identified as military insignia. Dr. Kim stepped forward. "This is Dr. Kim Jiho of Earth, aboard the Starship Phoenix. We come in peace and wish to establish friendly contact." The Taveri's eye stalks swiveled, focusing on the screen. When it spoke, the ship's translation system converted its vibrations into human language. "This is Admiral Torlak of the Taveri Expeditionary Fleet. You are piloting a Taveri vessel. Explain immediately or be destroyed." Commander Park joined Dr. Kim. "Admiral, we found this vessel abandoned on our planet 6 years ago. It was damaged and discarded by its previous crew. We have repaired and modified it." All 4 of the Admiral's eye stalks widened in what humans would later learn was an expression of disbelief. "You repurposed our waste material." "Impossible. That vessel was beyond salvation." "Yet here we are," Commander Park replied, gesturing to the bridge around him. "One species' trash is another species' treasure. Perhaps we could give you a tour of the improvements." There was a long silence. The Admiral's eye stalks twisted in what seemed to be a conversation with others off-screen. Finally, it turned back to them. "You will proceed to the coordinates we are transmitting. We will examine this modification you claim to have achieved." The transmission ended. Coordinates appeared on their navigation system. a position in space just beyond Mars' orbit. Should we comply? Lee asked nervously. They outgun us significantly. Commander Park nodded. We have nothing to hide and everything to gain. This is first contact. The moment humanity has wondered about for centuries. Let's make a good impression. The Phoenix changed course, heading toward the meeting point. When they arrived, they found the Taveri ships waiting, enormous vessels that made the Phoenix look tiny by comparison. The Admiral's ship extended a docking tube. With careful maneuvering, Commander Park matched it to their airlock. "Dr. Kim, you're with me," he said. "Everyone else, stay alert but friendly. This is a diplomatic mission now." The Taveri boarding party was imposing. 4 tall aliens with what were clearly weapons, escorting Admiral Torlak. They towered over the humans, their eye stalks constantly moving, examining everything. "Show me what you have done to our ship," the Admiral demanded. For 2 hours, Dr. Kim and Commander Park led the Taveri through the Phoenix, explaining their modifications, the hybrid systems, the human adaptations. The Admiral remained silent throughout, only occasionally making notes on a device strapped to one of its 4 arms. Finally, they returned to the bridge. Admiral Torlak turned all eye stalks toward Dr. Kim. "Your species has accomplished what our engineers deemed impossible," it said finally. "The quantum core damage alone should have rendered this vessel permanently inoperable. We didn't fix it the way you would have," Dr. Kim explained. "We created something new instead. Inefficient," the Admiral noted, "yet functional. Unusual. The Galactic Council will be most interested to learn of your species." Commander Park stepped forward. "We're eager to learn about the wider galaxy as well. This accidental meeting could be the beginning of a valuable relationship between our peoples." The Admiral's eye stalks twisted in what might have been amusement. "Perhaps, or perhaps you are more dangerous than you appear, creating weapons from our discards." "Not weapons," Dr. Kim said firmly. "Tools, bridges, ways to reach out and learn." As the Taveri prepared to return to their ship, Admiral Torlak turned back one last time. "You will be contacted, humans of Earth. The Galactic Council will decide what to do with your resourceful species." After the Taveri departed, the crew of the Phoenix let out a collective breath. "So," Commander Park said with a slight smile, "first contact. Not quite how we imagined it." Dr. Kim nodded, looking out at the massive alien fleet. "They're surprised, maybe even impressed, but also concerned. Because we fixed something they couldn't. Because we think differently," Dr. Kim replied. "And in the universe, different can be seen as dangerous." The Phoenix began its journey back to Earth, now carrying not just scientific data but news that would change human history forever. "We are not alone, and the galaxy has noticed us." 3 months after first contact, the Taveri returned to Earth's solar system. This time, they came not with a battle fleet but with a diplomatic vessel. The message they delivered to Earth's leaders was unexpected. The Galactic Council was concerned about humanity's rapid adaptation of alien technology. "Your species represents a potential destabilizing element," the Taveri ambassador explained in a meeting at the United Nations. "You took a discarded vessel and not only repaired it but modified it in ways our engineers would never have attempted." World leaders exchanged glances. Was this a compliment or a threat? The ambassador continued, its eye stalks swiveling to observe the room. "Therefore, the Council proposes a challenge. Your Phoenix against our finest vessel, the Stellar Dominance, in a series of trials. These trials will determine how your species is classified in the galactic community." "And what exactly does our classification determine?" asked the Secretary General. "Whether you are welcomed as equals, monitored as potential threats, or," the ambassador paused, "restricted for the safety of all." The implications were clear. This wasn't just a competition. It was a fight for humanity's future in the stars. Commander Park Do-yeon stood before Earth's Emergency Council later that day, his expression serious. "They're testing us. If we refuse, we look weak or afraid. If we accept, we risk everything on a ship that was never designed for competition. Can the Phoenix win? Asked the American president. Commander Park looked to Dr. Kim Ji-ho, who had been quiet until now. Not as it currently exists, she admitted. Their vessel is their latest model, designed specifically for these trials. Ours is a rehabilitated wreck held together with hybrid technology and human determination. So we refuse, the British Prime Minister asked. No, Dr. Kim said firmly. We upgrade. We have 2 weeks before the trials begin. That's enough time to implement several modifications we've been developing. The next 14 days were a blur of activity. The Phoenix was essentially rebuilt from the inside out. Dr. Kim's team worked around the clock, implementing experimental systems that merged Taveri principles with human innovation in ways neither species had imagined. Chief Engineer Moon Sun-hee developed a new configuration for the hybrid drive that, in theory, could push the Phoenix beyond its designed limits. It bypasses several safety protocols, she explained to Commander Park. The Taveri would never attempt it because their engineering philosophy prioritizes predictability over potential. Will it work? Park asked. Moon shrugged. In simulations, yes. In reality, we'll find out when we try it. The day of the challenge arrived. The trial would take place in the space between Earth and Mars, broadcast across the galaxy by Taveri technology. The stellar dominance arrived with an escort of smaller vessels, sleek, perfectly constructed ships that made the Phoenix look like exactly what it was, a salvaged wreck. Commander Park stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, his hand-picked crew at their stations. Dr. Kim had joined them as the technical advisor, her expertise crucial for the modified systems. The Taveri have transmitted the trial protocols, Navigation Officer Lee Ji-won announced. 3 tests: speed, combat simulation, and endurance. Of course, they picked the 3 areas where their ship has the greatest advantage, Dr. Kim muttered. The Phoenix moved into position. Across the void, the stellar dominance gleamed, its hull unmarked and pristine. Its captain, a veteran Taveri commander named Zeltek, appeared on their communication screen. We will begin with the speed trial, Zeltek announced, his eye stalks fixed forward in what humans had learned was a formal posture. A simple race around the orbit of Mars and back to this position. Acknowledged, Commander Park replied, keeping his tone professional despite the knot in his stomach. We are ready. At the signal, both ships accelerated. The difference was immediately apparent. The stellar dominance moved like a predator, smooth and powerful. The Phoenix strained against the forces, its hybrid systems working hard just to keep pace. We're falling behind, Lee reported as they reached the halfway point. They're already 30,000 kilometers ahead and increasing their lead. Commander Park looked to Dr. Kim. Time for Moon's special configuration. Dr. Kim hesitated. It hasn't been fully tested. The stress on the hull will be enormous. If we lose this first trial by a large margin, it sets the tone for everything that follows, Park said. Sometimes you have to take risks to win. Dr. Kim nodded and moved to the engineering station. Activating experimental drive configuration, she announced, inputting a complex sequence of commands. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Phoenix shuddered. The lights dimmed briefly before glowing brighter than before. A deep humming filled the ship as the modified hybrid core channeled energy in ways its Taveri designers would have considered impossible. Hold on, Commander Park ordered as the ship suddenly accelerated with startling force. The Phoenix shot forward, closing the gap with the stellar dominance. The Taveri vessel maintained its smooth trajectory, seemingly unconcerned, until the Phoenix pulled alongside, then began to pass it. On the communication screen, they could see Zeltek's eye stalks whipping about in what they now recognized as alarm. The stellar dominance increased its speed, but the Phoenix, defying all conventional physics, continued to pull ahead. They crossed the finish line 7 seconds before the Taveri ship. Impossible, Zeltek's translated voice came through. Your vessel exceeds its design specifications by 42%. As I said when we first met, Commander Park replied, one species' trash is another's treasure. The second trial was combat simulation. No actual weapons would be fired, but each ship would be equipped with sensors that registered hits from the other's targeting systems. This is where their superiority should be absolute, Dr. Kim warned. Their ship was designed for combat. Ours was a science vessel they abandoned. Commander Park nodded. Then we don't fight the way they expect us to. When the trial began, the stellar dominance moved with practiced precision, executing maneuvers that clearly came from a well-established combat doctrine. Their targeting systems locked onto the Phoenix repeatedly, scoring multiple hits in the first few minutes. We've lost shields and propulsion, simulated, reported Tactical Officer Kang Minji. At this rate, we'll be destroyed in less than 10 minutes. Time to change the rules, Commander Park said. Navigation. Execute pattern Echo 7. Lee looked surprised. Sir, that's an atmospheric fighter maneuver. It's not designed for spacecraft. Exactly. They won't expect it. The Phoenix suddenly dropped in a spiraling pattern that no space vessel should have attempted. The stellar dominance's targeting systems lost lock, their predictive algorithms unable to anticipate movements that defied conventional space combat tactics. For the next 20 minutes, the Phoenix performed maneuvers inspired by Earth's aerial dogfights rather than proper space combat. They barrel-rolled, they feinted, they executed sudden stops and starts that strained the inertial dampeners to their limits. The Taveri vessel, for all its technological superiority, couldn't adapt to the Phoenix's unorthodox style. By the end of the trial, the score was surprisingly close, with the Phoenix actually ahead by 3 hits. Your tactics are irrational, Zeltec communicated after the trial. No properly trained pilot would attempt such maneuvers. That's why they worked, Commander Park replied simply. The final challenge was endurance. Both ships would be pushed to their structural and system limits, testing how they performed under extreme stress. This is where we're most vulnerable, Dr. Kim warned. Our hybrid systems are innovative, but not designed for sustained maximum output. The endurance test began with both ships accelerating to their maximum speeds, then performing a series of increasingly difficult maneuvers while maintaining that velocity. As the test progressed, the stresses on both vessels increased dramatically. An hour in, warning lights began flashing across the Phoenix's bridge. Hull integrity at 72% and falling, reported Chief Engineer Moon. The hybrid core is starting to destabilize. We need to reduce power, or we risk a cascade failure. Commander Park looked at the data showing the stellar dominance still performing flawlessly. If we reduce power now, we lose. If we don't, we might lose the ship entirely, Dr. Kim warned. Commander Park stood from his chair. I'm going to manually regulate the core. We can push it further if I adjust the flow patterns in real time. That's too dangerous, Dr. Kim objected. The radiation in the core chamber at these levels is manageable for short exposures, Park finished. It's our only chance. Before anyone could stop him, Commander Park left the bridge, making his way to the core chamber. Inside, the hybrid power core glowed with unearthly light, the merged technologies of 2 worlds straining against each other. Park overrode the safety protocols and entered the chamber. The radiation warning immediately sounded, but he ignored it, moving to the manual controls. With skilled hands, he began to adjust the power flow, finding efficiencies that the automated systems couldn't detect. On the bridge, the crew watched in amazement as the Phoenix's performance stabilized, then improved. The warning lights stopped flashing. The ship's endurance extended beyond what should have been possible. When the test finally ended after 3 grueling hours, both ships were still operational. The stellar dominance had performed perfectly, as expected. But the Phoenix, against all odds, had matched its system for system, enduring stresses far beyond its design specifications. Commander Park returned to the bridge, his face pale from radiation exposure, but his eyes bright with triumph. "We did it," he said simply. "We proved that the worthless ship could outlast even their best." The Taveri's response came minutes later. Admiral Torlak himself appeared on screen, his eye stalks perfectly still, in what they now recognize as profound surprise. "The Galactic Council has witnessed your trials," the Admiral stated. "Your classification will be decided shortly. But I must ask, how did your vessel perform beyond its specifications in all 3 trials?" Dr. Kim stepped forward. "Because we didn't try to make it perfect. We made it adaptable instead." The Phoenix returned to Earth as a legend. When the massive hybrid vessel entered Earth's atmosphere, millions stood outside to watch it descend. The ship that aliens had abandoned as worthless now carried the pride and future of humanity within its patched hull. Commander Park Do-yeon, still recovering from radiation exposure during the endurance test, stood on the bridge as they approached the landing site. The same Australian outback, where the ship had crashed 6 years ago, was now transformed into a sprawling spaceport, built in anticipation of humanity's new place among the stars. "Beginning final approach," Navigation Officer Lee Juan announced, her voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. As the Phoenix touched down, the roar from the crowd was so loud it could be heard even through the ship's hull. When the crew emerged, they were greeted as heroes. Dr. Kim Ji-ho stepped out beside Commander Park, both blinking in the bright sunlight after weeks in space. "We did it," Park said quietly to her as they waved to the crowd. "We're just getting started," she replied with a smile. 3 days later, the Taveri diplomatic vessel landed at the same spaceport. This time, Admiral Torlak himself came to deliver the Galactic Council's decision. The meeting took place in a specially constructed chamber that accommodated both human and Taveri physiology. The Galactic Council has classified humanity as a Category 3 civilization, the Admiral announced, his eye stalks moving in formal patterns. "This grants you limited rights to interstellar travel and trade, under supervision." The human representatives exchanged glances. This was better than they had feared, but less than they had hoped. Furthermore, the Admiral continued, "The Council has noted your species' unusual approach to technology. Your methods are inefficient by our standards, yet produce unexpected results." Dr. Kim stepped forward. "Admiral, we appreciate the Council's decision, but we believe our approaches are complementary, not contradictory. Where you seek perfection, we seek adaptation. Together, we could achieve more than either could alone." The Admiral's eye stalks twisted in what they now recognize as thoughtfulness. An intriguing proposition. The Council had anticipated either submission or defiance from your species. This suggestion of partnership was not expected. "Humans specialize in the unexpected," Commander Park said with a slight smile. 2 weeks later, after extensive negotiations, the Taveri departed Earth with a surprising new agreement. An exchange of knowledge rather than conflict. 5 human scientists would travel to the Taveri homeworld, while 5 Taveri engineers would remain on Earth. Together, they would explore the possibilities of combining their different approaches to technology and problem-solving. "That symbol represents more than just a ship," he told them. "It represents an idea that different approaches, coming together, can create something greater than either could alone." The Phoenix wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It was adaptive, resilient, and unexpectedly powerful. One of the young human cadets raised her hand. "Is it true that the ship was considered trash by the Taveri? That they just left it because they thought it wasn't worth fixing?" The instructor smiled. "Yes. And that's the most important lesson of all. Never underestimate what others have discarded. One civilization's trash becomes another civilization's treasure." As the Aurora led its fleet beyond the solar system, as Dr. Kim continued her work on the Galactic Council, as new generations of explorers prepared to carry humanity's spirit to the stars, the legacy of the Phoenix lived on. It wasn't just a ship that had been saved from abandonment. It was a philosophy that continued to guide humanity's path among the stars. The once worthless Starship had indeed become unstoppable, not through perfection, but through adaptation. Not through following established paths, but by creating new ones. And in doing so, it had changed the destiny not just of humanity, but of the galaxy itself.